Now, I had a couple of emails, and they were very nice and made me look forward to class even more. And there were a couple of, well, one person sent a story about a man. Well, forget it. I should just either read it to you or not read it to you. It was almost like a funny joke. Let's see. Okay, this is about a deceased Brazilian journalist named Sergio Porto. And he wrote the news in a comic way, signing himself Stanislaw Ponte Preta. And he wrote once that he had seen two very ugly women walking together. And he thought, them both is the ugliest. And the student noticed this because of the either-or Cartesian kind of blindness. Either or is the ugliest. Well, anyway, they both were the ugliest. That was pretty funny. I am taking steps to try to appreciate the stories of people more in my life because of the suggestion that Olavo made that hearing and understanding people's stories is a beginning point of wisdom. And my mother has written her memoirs. She has written all of her memories of important things in her life. And most of these writings are secret. She will not let anyone read them until she is dead. And also, my father has to be dead, because she says they contain sensitive information about my father and herself. But she made an exception last Christmas. She pulled out 2 chapters of her personal life biography and made it available to her granddaughters, my 2 daughters, and my nieces. And she recorded these 2 chapters on an audio tape. And I have been listening to it in the car. And it's really wonderful. The 2 chapters that she pulled out to share are one chapter when she met my father. And then the second chapter is when my father proposed marriage to her. And she gave these chapters of her life story to my daughters so that they could become wise. She wants them to hear her story and get inspired to leave their life in God's hands and to find a husband who will be right for them. So I've been listening to the story of my mother when she was a girl. And it is really wonderful to get to know her as a 25-year-old. Of course, I never knew her until she was much older. And I, at the time, was a child. So I can see how history repeats itself. I can see how she had various approaches to life and to God, which I can identify with, but she also did things differently. And in some respects, I wish I had done it her way. But I'm enjoying the story of my mother's life. I'm also reading another story that I'll tell you about right now. In the story I'm reading, I have not finished the book, but it is about two boys. They are both 16 years old, and they are students at an all-boys school, and they are best friends. And one of the two boys is the best athlete in the school, and the other boy is the best student in the school. So both of them are superlatives, and they are best friends. However, the boy who is the best student is deeply jealous of the athletic boy. And this jealousy takes many forms, and mostly it is very subconscious, but it permeates his relationship with his friend, and his friend is completely unaware because his friend is not the jealous type. And at a climax in the story, the studious boy causes an accident which causes the athletic boy to fall down and shatter his leg in such a way that the athletic boy will be a cripple for the rest of his life. And the athletic boy did not realize that the accident was caused intentionally by his friend, even though he sensed it a little bit, yet he dismissed the possibility because he didn't believe it was possible or credible that his friend would do such a thing. It was psychologically impossible for the athletic boy to do such a thing, so he assumed it was impossible that his friend did it. And as I read this, it struck me again, as it has struck me in the past, how destructive jealousy is. I have told my children that jealousy is one of the most destructive vices. And this book is bringing this point home to me again. As I said, I'm not finished the book. In the second half of the book, we will see how the two boys work out their relationship because they are roommates in the school, and because the athletic boy will not believe that his friend intentionally injured him, even though the friend confessed it. And now the friend is, in the book where I'm reading, is trying to make it up to him. So it'll be interesting to see how the book ends. I'm very interested in any stories that you hear and would like to send me, or that you are reading, short stories that you would write in English, just a brief summary of the main point in the story. If you can write those and send them, it will be good. Now, we had a couple of questions that I think it will help you to see the answer to. One of them was a sentence in a book a student was reading, and she had a question. I will shorten the sentence a little bit to show you the question. The student looked at this sentence, and said, what does the phrase "as though" mean? No one should despise grammar as though it was of little importance. If grammar was not important, then it would be appropriate to despise it, or to look down on it, or to hold it with little importance. If it were not important, then you despise it. However, it is important, so no one should despise it. As though changes the situation to something else. So, as though it was of little importance means if it were of little importance, you could do this, you could despise it. But since this is not the case, it is a contrary to fact condition, then you should not do it. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. It's kind of complicated, kind of difficult for me to explain. But as though means suggesting that this case is true. Well, then you would do this. Excuse me. And I think there might have been one other question. Well, actually, because of the time, I think I may put this last question to the end if we have time. One student was interested in more about biblical inerrancy. And actually, I meant to prepare to answer this question, and I didn't. So I think what I'll do is move this to next week, and then I can give a more full answer. So next week, I'll say more about biblical inerrancy and what my disagreement with it was and is, and the outcome of how I managed to graduate from seminary, considering my views on biblical inerrancy. So I'll try to remember that next week. All right, let's go to the book right now. Let me find my place in my notes. And one moment, I have to get a pencil. Okay. We are on page, let's see, where are we? We are on page 42. I think I would like to begin reading a little bit before, just to get a head start, but I won't really comment on it that much, and then move into the new material. The new material begins in the middle of page 42. So, I will just begin reading with the on page 41, the paragraph that begins, "When one considers one's relation. So, page 41. When one considers one's relation to the language one was born into, and the way in which that language exists, one finds oneself contemplating the unstateable basic truth that Andreski dismisses as the linguistic mirage. Because the relation, or the way, can't be stated, and eluding discursive treatment doesn't permit of logical or clear exposition, it is not for Andreski real, or anything but mystification. Yet, what is at issue is the precondition of language, thought, and objectivity. So essentially the precondition that disciplined minds like Andreski's have no need to recognize it when they think objectively, or even before or after. Yet, it is an inescapable condition of life, and thought is a living activity. And, though thinkers, even thinkers about social reality, can dismiss it as linguistic mirage, the further their field of thought is from mathematics, the more damaging is the non-recognition to the quality of their thought. The dangerousness of Andreski's Cartesian allegiance is seen in the way in which he offers to pass off on the reader a plausible but false and obfuscating either-or. I am far from being tolerant of the cliché about man being able to control his own future, but I deplore Andreski's common-sense recourse to the word hypostatization. For, as soon as we ask who is man, we see that he does not exist, says Andreski, and there are only men and women with varied and largely incompatible sentiments, dispositions, and aims. Such utterances, need I say it, can in some contexts be salutary common sense. But common sense is not enough, and Andreski here demonstrates this by insisting on its final authority in regard to issues that transcend its powers even to stimulate plausible encouragement. The tactic, if what is so obviously uncalculating can be called that, by which he seeks to legitimize his common-sense stance by backing the liberal philosophical individualists as true collectivists, is naive. For as soon as we ask who is man, we see he does not exist. When, to quote the title of the introductory chapter of my last book, I wrote, "Life is a necessary word." I also wrote that life is there only in individual beings, meaning that the only way in which one can point to life as concretely there is to point to an individual being and say, there you have an actual manifestation of life. This last proposition has a meaning, to convey which meaning is a function that transcends mere convenience, and is not to be disposed of by asking who or which is life. Okay, moving on. The fundamental truth or recognition I have gestured towards. Fundamental truth or recognition to which a close interrogation of experience brings us, eludes discursive treatment, a fact that doesn't prove it to be unimportant. It is when, I said, one considers one's relation to the language one was born into, and the way in which that language, in which one has vital relations with other human beings, exists, that the fundamental recognition can least be escaped, but challenges thought insistently. Where language is concerned, life is human life. It is man. The fundamental truth or recognition that Levis is gesturing toward is the fact that some things can be known but cannot be said. I mentioned last week, and I'll repeat now, some examples. Although there are millions of examples, I'm sure, that lie beneath the surface that I can't recognize. But Olavo gave the example. He said, if he tries to explain me to another person, will that person know me? The answer is no. They do not know me until they get to know me intuitively, face to face. Olavo knows me, but cannot express who I am to another person so that they will know me. To know a person eludes discursive treatment. Another thing is, you know what human life is. You know, well, for one thing, you know what life is. It has a biological component, but it also has a tacit component. We discuss whether someone has life if they are brain dead. Biologically, they're alive, but philosophers would be able to question whether or not they have life. Another thing is human nature. Think for a moment what you know of human nature, how you recognize humanity. And then think for a moment, suppose all people were to be killed, some kind of a natural disaster, and humanity became extinct. Would that change human nature? The answer is no. Human nature has independent existence. It is what it is, whether or not there is a living example. So all of these are examples of things that can be known, but cannot really be pinned down with a clear, logical, verbal statement. And to suggest that reality itself is limited to what human beings can understand and express is to misunderstand the nature of reality and to misunderstand the limits of language itself and the purpose of language, the usage of language. Language carries meaning. It is not the meaning. Language is a bridge upon which meaning can travel from one person to another. But language does not define the meaning. Language contains meaning. Kind of like a straw that you can drink out of. If there was a straw between my mouth and a bucket, and I were, pushing out juice or something, water, the straw itself is not the water, although it gives shape to it and it enables the water to travel from me into that receptacle. So, when Levis says, well, the fundamental truth or recognition I have gestured toward, fundamental truth or recognition to which a close interrogation of experience brings us. So, this idea that reality is much greater than that which can be clearly and logically stated, is what we know by experience. Okay? This is a fact that doesn't prove it to be unimportant. The fact that it cannot be spoken does not make it unimportant. It is when, I said, one considers one's relation to the language one was born into, and the way in which that language, in which one has vital relations with other human beings, exists, that the fundamental recognition can least be escaped. So, to think that reality is defined by language is to misunderstand reality and to misunderstand language. And if you really think about your relation to the language of your birth, you will understand that the language embodies meaning or contains meaning. It's a tool. Language is a tool. But thought is in a different place in our soul and in our brain. So, this Cartesian dualism, our recognition of reality should challenge it insistently. Where language is concerned, life is human life, is man. Last class or the class before, I made a distinction between capital L life and little l life. Capital L life is in the third realm. Little l life can be defined by biology. Generally speaking, when I use a capital at the beginning of a noun like that, I'm putting it into third realm. Okay, next paragraph. And if you have any questions, please send them, even in the middle of class. I know it is difficult to pin down where the questions even are, but if you can't do it, certainly I can't. So, send questions if I've missed something. Moving on. The dangerousness of Andreski lies in his assuming that his discursive common sense use of language is the use of language for thought, is, in the distinctive spirit that limits it, essentially, and more or less coterminously, that, and inducing or confirming in most of his readers the blankness he reveals. But the recognition closed to him matters today as never before. In the past, the inevitable routine tacit acquaintance we all have sufficed. But today, his assumption about the real, for his confident assumption about the nature of thought, is that, seems to him so unchallengeable, because it is the assumption on which our civilization is built, or by which it is driven. It might be called the principle that civilization relies on to keep the machinery working. It is a principle that means death. This is the age when a computer can write a poem. Okay, let's go to the beginning of this paragraph. Okay, I'm going to try to weave in some of Olavo's notes and comments as we get into this paragraph. So I will be paging back in my own notes to see if I can get it right. I would like to begin with a word. The word is blankness. If a sheet of paper is blank, there is nothing written on it. If a person is blank, this suggests that there is no one there, that it's like looking into a window of a house that is empty. If you look into someone's eyes and they are blank, you think there's no one there. Olavo feels that the Cartesian ego is blank. He talked to me about the insincerity of Descartes and his philosophies when people speak of them. Descartes claimed to experience universal doubt. He said, I doubt everything. And then he said, I think, therefore I am. In other words, I doubt everything except my own existence. According to Olavo, and I agree, a person cannot say this with sincerity. The true human experience is that we rest upon a mountain of certainty, and we have a few doubts like flies flying around our head that we bat away. We rest on a mountain of certainty, and our doubts are relatively insignificant annoyances. Olavo spoke, Olavo spoke of an approach to philosophical texts that some authors take called structural analysis. There happened to be a very fat book on his desk that brought this up. And he put his hand on the book and he talked about the author and about the process of reading philosophy and analyzing it structurally. He said that people who approach philosophical texts to analyze them structurally, they place great importance on the exact meaning of the words. But in focusing so hard on the exact meaning, they miss the intuitively apprehended truth that is behind the words. They don't read between the lines. They don't catch the gist of what the author is trying to say. In English, we have a phrase, I cannot see the forest for the trees. In other words, I am looking so hard at the trees that I cannot see the forest. The trees have gotten in my way. People who look too hard at the exact meaning can miss the shades of meaning that are behind. A philosophical author is trying to express experiences that he has had. And the goal is that his words should evoke a similar experience from the store of human nature, which is common between people. So if the author has had a certain kind of experience, it is likely that a reader has had something similar. And the words are meant to evoke ideas which the reader then can add to. The words are not meant to define exhaustively the meaning of the author. Another example of that which can be known but not expressed that I thought of this morning as I was preparing, but I didn't mention it a minute ago, is the exact shade of colors one sees when he is watching the sunrise over the ocean. You can know it, but you can't tell it. You can evoke it if someone has seen a sunrise over the ocean themselves. So, you don't understand a philosophical concept. You meet a person. This is what Olavo said to me. And I thought about it quite a bit. Do you want to go just turn that off? My cell phone is ringing in the other room. You do not understand a philosophic truth. You meet a person. Olavo told me the story of Plato. When Plato was a young man, he met Socrates. And Socrates had such an impact on Plato as a young man that Plato spent his life trying to communicate Socrates to the world. There was a quote about Plato that he spent his life attempting to exteriorize. The soul. I shouldn't be using this, it damages the board, of Socrates. The first time I heard the word, I read the word exteriorize, I was reading the story of a veterinary student, a veterinarian student, someone who was learning how to be a doctor for animals. Well, actually, the real story was about a fully qualified veterinarian. And he had to perform an operation on a cow. It was a cesarean section. The cow was having a difficult time giving birth. She was a very valuable and beloved animal. So this vet had a medical student with him who was seeing practice. He was watching. Part of his training was to go around and watch. Well, the vet in question was a young veterinarian, and he had never done this operation before. And he was very nervous, but it had to be done. And the veterinary student encouraged him. He said, "It's easy. We do it all the time at the veterinary college." And the vet said, "You know how to do it?" And he said, "Sure, nothing to it." So the vet said, "Okay, stand by me." And he washed his hands and got his equipment and put the cow to sleep and put him on a bale of hay, got the knife, and then he said, "Where do I make the cut?" And the veterinary student said, well, right there, indicating a point. And the vet said, "Ah, yes, a bold incision." And he opened up the cow. And then a bunch of blood came, lots of blood. And the vet tried to staunch it. And he got blood all over himself. And the farmer was like, "What's going wrong?" And after he got the blood down, he said to the student, "Why didn't you tell me there was an artery there? You said to cut there." And then, "Okay, what's next?" And the veterinary student said, "Well, you exteriorize the uterus." And it turned out that the veterinary student really didn't know what he was doing. He had been sitting all the way at the back the one time the operation was done. So he really only remembered the bookwork. So he said, "Exteriorize the uterus." And so between the two of them, they managed to get this baby calf delivered. But exteriorize means to bring forth something which is deep within and hidden inside. Bring it forth for public inspection. And Plato spent his life exteriorizing the soul of Socrates. When we analyze philosophical text, our job is to exteriorize the soul of the philosopher. Our job is to apprehend the experience which is behind the words and underneath the words. And for that, we must be human beings. I'm jumping around in the paragraph, but let's go to the last line of the paragraph. This is the age when a computer can write a poem. There's an internet program called Wordle. You can look it up online. What it does is it creates works of art from words that you put into the program. Once I had a very heart-wrenching problem that involved several people and went on for several years. and I wrote a journal entry pouring my heart out to God about this problem. And I took that file, that word processing file, text file, and inputted it into the internet application called Wordle. And it came back with the words of my thought arranged artistically, with the most important words largest and less important words smaller and in relation. And it did this according to a rubric that involved color and shape and fonts and arrangement. Sometimes when I hit submit, it would come back a jumble. Other times when it hit submit, it would come back meaningful. And once or twice, when I hit submit, it came back as a breathtaking and deep expression of my heart. And when that occurred, I did a screenshot, kept the image, and printed it out. And I was able to share it with some people who were involved in the problem. And it was very moving, deeply moving to them. This is the age when a computer can write a poem. However, it takes a human being to recognize when a poem has been written. Recognition of life is a living activity. Olavo talks about the importance of being a sincere human being. This is the opposite of blankness. If blankness means no one's home, then to be truly human means that someone is home. When someone looks into your face, are they seeing a person or are they seeing a mask? Now, Olavo speaks in the context of this structural analysis of philosophy. He jumped off into the concept of people taking on social roles as their identity and then relating to other people as though they were their social role, as though their social role defined them comprehensively. I am not a person, I am a policeman. I am not a person, I am a teacher. I am not a person, I am your employer. Or I am not a person, I am your employee. Olavo believes this is bad. And I have been taken with Olavo's personality and with Olavo's vision of this. And I want to be sincere. I want to be a real person. I do not want to allow my social role to define me. I think a lot of this is closely related to the questions of language that we are talking about. In this particular paragraph. I'll begin reading at the beginning. The dangerousness of Andreski lies in his assuming that his discursive, common-sense use of language is the use of language for thought. So, he is saying that speech defines the reality it contains. My social role defines me. Do you see how the two fit together? Or to look at the philosophical text structurally, the words define the meaning, as opposed to the words evoke the person. Continuing to read. He assumes that his discursive, common sense use of language is the use of language for thought, is, in the distinctive spirit that limits it, essentially, and more or less coterminously, that. So, coterminously means it ends at the same place. There is nothing more. So, what you can say is all that you mean, and you cannot mean any more. What you have said with language is what you mean, and is coterminous with what you mean. What you mean is not more than what you have said. And inducing or confirming in most of his readers the blankness he reveals. Andreski himself is blank. He induces blankness in his readers, or he confirms it if they are already in that state. Hold on one second. I need to grab something. I'm losing my mental capacity. I'll share with you that I have been on a special diet for the past 6 weeks or so, and it causes me to lose my train of thought, particularly toward the end of class, every time. So I have some crackers here, and I'm thinking maybe they'll give me just enough blood sugar to make it 20 more minutes without losing my train of thought. So that's why I'm eating during class. Okay, so if everybody's blank, they can all be blank together. And when Andreski speaks this way, he confirms it in his readers, or induces it if they weren't blank to start off with. But the recognition closed to Andreski matters today as never before. Why? And remember, this was 1950. In the past, the inevitable routine tacit acquaintance we all have sufficed. So, in the past, people were smart enough to realize when they look at the limitless cosmos, they realized that they didn't know the reality of it. But now, astronomers think they know. And I've even heard speculation about what exists at the end of the universe. Scientists think they know. And in the past, when a philosopher stood on the beach and saw the ocean, he was humbled by the fact that there is so much more than he could know. But now, people feel they know. That's what he's saying here. In the past, the inevitable routine tacit acquaintance we all have sufficed to help us to understand that there are things that cannot be said. Okay? But today, his assumption about the real, that means Andreski's assumption about the nature of reality. For his confident assumption about the nature of thought is that we know that he is making assumptions about the nature of reality, because when he says language is all there is, he is making a statement about reality. Okay, so that's what that means. And he is confident about it. His confident assumption about the nature of thought is that seems to him so unchallengeable because it is the assumption on which our civilization is built or by which it is driven. Okay, we need to take out these clauses that are in the middle of the main sentence so we make sure we get the main sentence. His assumption about the real seems to him so unchallengeable because it is the assumption on which our civilization is built or by which it is driven. Now, I shared with you a few classes back that I myself am a Cartesian because I was raised and educated in this milieu. Andreski also. All of us these days have been raised in a worldwide cultural milieu that believes that science has the answers. And Andreski doesn't even question this basic assumption because it appears to be universal. However, it is a philosophical spin of science. It isn't verified by science itself. People think that science has proven that we know what reality is. But in fact, it is philosophers who have made that pronouncement about scientific knowledge. Okay. So it is the assumption on which our civilization is built, or by which it is driven. I was making sure I didn't miss anything that Olavo had said. Okay. Or by which it is driven. It might be called the principle that civilization relies on to keep the machinery working. It is a principle that means death. This is an age when a computer can write a poem. Death would be capital D death. Death of the spirit, death of the soul, death of human spirit. All of these are third realm realities. It doesn't mean physical death. Although, with the rise of crime and immorality, it can even lead to physical death. However, this philosophical principle of materialism is driving our society. I don't fully understand why our society feels the necessity of this, but it certainly seems to. Okay, I'm going to read on. However, I will share with you that I've come to the end of the portion that I've discussed with Olavo. So, I will probably end with simply a reading of the next paragraph, and we'll go into it more deeply next week after I've had time to discuss it with Olavo. But let's read it and get a first glance of where he's going with his argument. A creative center, I'm on page 43 now, reading first full paragraph. A creative center of the educated public we need will, then, cultivate a more adequate notion of thought. And that means cultivating the practice. There must be practiced thinking that brings in consciously, with pertinacious and delicate resource, the un-Cartesian reality underlying language and implicit in it. What is inexpressible in terms of logic and clarity, the unstatable, must not be excluded from thought, as Andreski excludes it when he plumps so naively and demonstratively for individual collectivism. And this brings us to the importance, in relation to my theme, of creative literature. All major literary creation is concerned with thought that men of Andreski's bent should take seriously. That is a constatation, the force of which I have tried to make plain in a discussion of one of the world's great novels, Little Dorrit. In that work, as the challenged critique must aim at bringing out, Dickens, making a characteristically profound and necessarily creative inquest into society in his time, tackles in sustained and unmistakably deliberate thought the basic unstatable that eludes the logic of Cartesian clarity, and of philosophical discourse, too. Taking it as granted that life is the artist's concern, he develops in full pondering consciousness the un-Cartesian recognition that, while it is there only in individual lives, it is there, and its being there makes them lives. What the word life represents and evokes is not to be disposed of under the rubric of hypostatization, or collectivity, or even linguistic convenience. I would like to make a few comments at the beginning here, and then we'll see what else Olavo has to share with us when I meet with him this week. Okay, a creative center of the educated public we need. We need modifies educated public. So, the educated public that we need, okay, the creative center of that educated public that we need, will cultivate a more adequate notion of thought. Okay, cultivate suggests that we will work to nurture the growth of. If you will cast your mind back, a long way back, to the beginning of this course, we talked about how to foster maturity in students. And we talked about how a seed grows, but the wise and skilled farmer nurtures the seed with proper treatment. They pull the weeds, they give fertilizer and water and sunshine and temperature correct and protection from frost, whatever. All of these things so that the plant can grow and bear fruit. Now, the farmer cannot create growth. He cannot force growth. He cannot direct growth. Growth is programmed into the DNA of the organism by God. Growth is part of the life, and the shape of the growth is patterned by God. But it can be fostered. This word cultivate suggests all of that. The educated public that you and I hope to be a part of cannot just turn on non-Cartesian thinking like a light switch. Oh, I'm a Cartesian today. I repent. I'll be a non-Cartesian tomorrow. We must cultivate the perspective, the way we cultivate wisdom, and we cultivate virtue, we cultivate maturity, and we cultivate the image of God within ourselves and within those we love. So, the creative center of the educated public that we need will cultivate a more adequate notion of thought. So what do you think the more adequate notion will entail? Give it some thought. To me, I think it is one of the unstatables. I feel like I know, but I feel like I would have trouble defining it. I think the more adequate notion of thought will have something to do with opening my mind to the wisdom of God as I look at the events of the world. That's me. What do you think the more adequate notion of thought will include? If you would email me, I'll share your answer next week, and we'll talk about it again. I'm going to underline it right now. More adequate notion of thought. What does it entail? I'll write that down for you so you can write it, because this is homework. In your opinion, I am not asking a question that has a right or wrong answer. I am asking you to dig into your own heart and try to state what may seem somewhat unstatable. Okay, so in your opinion, what would the more adequate notion of thought referenced on page 43 include? Okay, can you see that? And write it down and send me an email a sentence or two of what you think the more adequate notion of thought would entail. The one we are supposed to cultivate. I will continue reading. And that means cultivating the practice. That's another question. The practice of what? How can you practice thinking in a more broad and deep and intuitive way? So, that means cultivating the practice. I believe what Levis is saying is the educated public needs a more adequate notion of thought, and that means we, as educators, must cultivate the practice of thinking deeply in students. And Levis's method of cultivating it is practical criticism, literary analysis, I believe. But anyway, I want to know what you think, because you're probably not a literary scholar and expert as Levis is. Reading on. There must be practiced thinking that brings in consciously, with pertinacious and delicate resource, the un-Cartesian reality, underlying language, and implicit in it. Stopping there. Some years ago, I became aware of a way to interpret dreams. The idea was that in our subconscious, deep part of our soul and mind, we conceive of impressions and we have thoughts that are unstated and unconscious. But sometimes they build up and they want to be conscious, but we might keep them down. Maybe it is a threatening kind of realization. Maybe, for example, we suspect that the stock market is going to crash. Our intuition is that it is going to crash, but we can't face it, so we reject it. We refuse to think that. But deep down, our uncertainty about our investment is building. Maybe a person in that situation might have a dream, and in that dream they might see a wall come tumbling down and destroy a house, or fall on some children playing and crush them or something. And that dream, in its imagery, might be bringing to the surface the anxiety that something that seemed like a stable, solid protection and security was getting ready to fall and injure and destroy my family, my children, my house. And when I wake up having had that dream, I might remember it for a moment and then just forget it. Oh, I dreamed of a wall falling down, and it destroyed my house and crushed my children. What a bad dream. Or I can think to myself, what is this dream telling me? And maybe on the wings of that dream, the truth of my subconscious impression can come to the surface. And I can say, wow, I think maybe the wall represented the stock market. And I think maybe I'm afraid that it's going to crash and I'm going to lose my house and destroy my family. Maybe I should really look at that. Maybe I should call up my stockbroker and make some changes. Maybe I should move some money out and put it in a more secure investment, because I really am beginning to worry about this. Well, this is what came to my mind when I read the sentence. There must be practiced thinking that brings in consciously, with pertinacious and delicate resource, the un-Cartesian reality, underlying language, and implicit in it. Of course, I'm not really thinking about language. I'm thinking about life and reality and the non-Cartesian thinking. But the idea of taking that which is tacit, unstated, and unstatable, and attempting to bring it to the conscious fore of your mind so that you can express it in language. I think that's what this is getting at. So, practiced thinking. So, Levis wants the students to be reading literature and analyzing it for practice. And by doing this, bring consciously to the foreground of their mind the human reactions that the characters have to the crises of their lives. Okay, practice thinking that brings to the fore the unstated stuff, the uncartesian reality underlying language and implicit in it. What is inexpressible in terms of logic and clarity, the unstatable, must not be excluded from thought, as Andreski excludes it, when he plumps so naively and demonstratively for individual collectivism. Plumps, puts his thought and his support in this one idea, as though it's the either or, so naively, as though it were the only choice. He is excluding from his thought an entire spectrum of possibilities. We must not do that. And this brings us to the importance, in relation to my theme, of creative literature, the theme of the book. All major literary creation is concerned with thought. Thought that men of Andreski's bent should take seriously. Men like Andreski, social scientists and clear thinkers, should take seriously the kind of non-Cartesian thought that artists indulge in and function in. That is a constatation, the force of which I have tried to make plain in a discussion of one of the world's great novels, Little Dorrit. Okay, all major literary creation is concerned with thought. That's the constatation. That's the sentence that he tried to make plain in his analysis of Little Dorrit. Apparently, in Little Dorrit, Dickens put forth the idea that creativity was the characteristic of life, and that artists were the ones who were dealing in creativity, and therefore artists were the ones who were examples of life. Apparently, according to Andreski, this is a theme in Little Dorrit that he expressed in his book entitled Dickens the Novelist, Chapter 5. I think that was the chapter. In that work, as the challenged critique must aim at bringing out, Levis did the critique himself, Dickens, making a characteristically profound and necessarily creative inquest into society of his time, tackles in sustained and unmistakably deliberate thought the basic unstatable that eludes the logic of Cartesian clarity and of philosophical discourse, too, taking it as granted that life is the artist's concern, meaning artists manifest life. Capital L, life. He develops in full pondering consciousness, because these unstatables can't be stated briefly and succinctly. They have to be pondered, ruminated on. Pondering consciousness, the un-Cartesian recognition that, while it, meaning creativity, is there only in individual lives, it is there, and in its being there, it makes them lives, with a capital L. What the word life, I would use a capital L, represents and evokes is not to be disposed of under the rubric of hypostatization, treating an abstract as though it were concrete. he's not treating it as though it's concrete. He knows it's abstract, and then some, or collectivity, or even linguistic convenience. Linguistic convenience, by that he really means practical usage. Okay, we really should stop there. For one reason, it's time, and for the second, I absolutely have not gone over the rest with Olavo. We kind of touched on this paragraph. That's how I know about the fact that Levis thinks creativity is the characteristic of life, because Olavo told me. This paragraph didn't make that completely clear to me. So let's go ahead and stop here. Here is a little bit of homework for you, and I think this is falling apart again. Well, anyway, here's some homework for you. And if you have any questions, send them right now. And we'll be back in 5 minutes to finish the class if you don't have any questions. So see you in 5 minutes.
Okay, one student says that I think Levis is being ironic about our Cartesian world when he says this is the age when a computer can write a poem. Isn't he? Isn't he being ironic? The value of a poem is in the third realm where the Cartesian thought can't reach.
This is mainly a comment. The student says that it seems to him that Levis is being ironic when he says that this is the age when a computer can write a poem. Because a computer obviously can't reach into the third realm where poetry exists. I think for me, I would say, yes, of course he's being ironic. But another word that comes to my mind is wry. W-R, wry, which it means sort of it's hard for me to explain the meaning because it really is the perfect word. There's a little bit of humor, but it's kind of dark and expressing something that's bad and sad and disappointing and grievous. So someone would give a wry smile as they admit something bad. Yeah. It really bears a lot of consideration to think about the fact that we live in an age where a computer can write a poem, and I believe that is very true. Was there another one?
Yeah. Another student asks what tackle means. As in the sentence, somebody tackles in sustained and unmistakably deliberate thought.
Where is... All right, the question is about the use of the word tackles. Tackles, and I remember it, but I don't remember where it is. If you who are asking this question can send us exactly where it is, that would be helpful. I'm looking for it. Oh, I found it. I found it. Okay, here it is. It's in the middle of page 43. The sentence says, Dickens, making a characteristically profound and necessarily creative inquest into society of his time, tackles, in sustained and unmistakably deliberate thought, the basic unstatable that eludes the logic of Cartesian clarity. Tackles means wrestles with. In American football, we have one person is running, carrying the ball, and everybody else tries to tackle him. And by tackling him, and that means knock him down. So they go flying after him and they hit him real hard so that he falls down. Now the guy they are tackling is a 250-pound athlete who is running very determinedly. So to tackle him will involve great strength, great determination, and sustained effort. And so it's a good image for tackling a problem, wrestling with a problem. So it means to take on a challenge and do it with a lot of power. So tackles the basic unstatable that eludes the logic of Cartesian clarity. So he's suggesting that what Dickens does in Little Dorrit is he takes a very challenging task on himself to grab hold of the unstatable intuition that life necessarily involves creativity and that artists are the ones who embody this, and bring it out, exteriorize it, and make it explicit in words for the reading public. And since this is such a challenge, he uses the word tackles. Anything else?
Yeah. Well, it's not really a question, it's just a comment.
Okay, another comment.
Okay, Dear Margarita, by filigree work.
Oh, good. Yeah, go ahead.
I intended to say things like the example of utterance, remarks that would pass by imperceptibly under our myopic English eyes. It is not an anticipation because if you don't do it, none of us will. I think that you are already doing this. However, I think that you are increasingly worried about the understanding of Levis's ideas, which is very good. But don't forget to give us English language hints, of which we are so thirsty. It is not a complaint, you are a brilliant teacher. It's not a complaint, you're a brilliant teacher, and I like the classes more and more. By the way, sorry about my inappropriate use of words like filigree and probably a lot of other ones. Thank you for the kindness. See you tonight.
Okay. This comment had to do with an email interaction between myself and a student where he used a word that I didn't know, and he was clarifying the word for me. And the comment, I think, would be good for the other students to hear as well. The word he used was filigree. Filigree. F-I-L-I-G-R-E-E. And what he meant by this word, I would use the word minutia. Minutia. This is a word you can look up in the dictionary. Minutia. Minutia. The comment the student made was, you, as students of English, tend to stumble over words that are, in some sense, so basic that a native speaker like myself won't even notice those words. The native speaker, some words are just part of the grammatical structure of the language such that we don't even notice them. And for that, he called that the filigree of the language. Filigree is a kind of handicraft that involves very minute work with beads. And so I suppose there was an analogy to the very minute points of the language, which to me are so obvious that I don't even think of them. Kind of like when you see a curtain, a beautiful curtain, you don't think about the fact that there's a rod back there and there are screws holding it into the wall and hooks to hold the curtain. You don't think about any of that. You just notice the design of the fabric and the cut of the curtain. Well, when I read, I don't even notice some of the more basic constructions. And increasingly, I am interested in the meaning of the texts. But the student was encouraging me not to forget to explain these more minute aspects of the construction, because you as students really need it. Now, what I say is, I will try to do that, but you should ask. Because if you ask, I'll focus on it. And when the student wrote to me this week asking what as though means, that's one of those things I never even think about what it means. But it's just part of the structure. And I will continue to try to anticipate that kind of a problem. But I fully encourage you to throw it at me in a question. There are no annoying questions and there are no stupid questions. It's helpful to me if anybody will point out what these kinds of things might be. And I'll keep trying to get to them. So thank you for that comment and that feedback. Okay, are we done now or is there anything else? Okay, I think that's it. So I will see you next week.